All right, we are live. This is Menor speaking. I haven't done a live stream with a guest in over a year and a half. And if you watch those old live streams, you'll know why. Today we have Alex Kosma.
Hello.
Yeah, I suppose I could say how we met, virtually met. We're both fans of the Lotus Eaters. We're popping around, and we both use our real name. And we're both named Alex, so what can you say? That's enough similarities for two men to become friends, to be honest.
Sure.
So
I have seen it happen with far less.
and then it breaks off too. It's like the guy moved 2 miles down the road, or like a little bit down the road. He goes to a different bar. It's like we haven't seen him in 10 years.
Right.
Nobody is he alive? Who knows? Who cares?
Yeah. And then you run into him at the grocery store. It's like, oh, we're just picking up exactly where we left off.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the topic of today is what is a conservative? Because I don't think anyone's actually defined that. I think that's about as poorly defined on the right. Maybe there's a lot of definition that I'm just not aware of. But I'm a normie, and I don't read books. So what I see is what I see. The idea of a conservative, the first question I always have is, what are we conserving? Right? That's, from what I can tell, that seems to change from people to people, right? So what are we going to rally around as a least, like, are we going to have different conservatives, or are conservatives just going to rally around the least common denominator of conservatism, which at this moment seems to be financial and free speech. Well, arguably free speech. Alex, what do you think? What do you think conservatism is?
Gosh. So you're absolutely right that there's a problem in defining this, because if you look around, you see probably four types of conservatives, all of whom insist that, all or most of the others are not in fact conservatives and are some other thing.
Oh yeah, the no true Scotsman argument. Yeah.
Right. Well, you've been talking about this a fair amount, like the split between the ethnats, the civnats, and the '90s Democrats, say, as sort of larger coalitions within the movement. And you've been pretty insistent that, despite over the protestations of the civnats and the ethnats, it was actually the '90s Dems that won the election.
I mean, that's just demonstrably true, I think. I mean, but I'm
right. But all groups are declaring victory, and they're declaring that theirs was a decisive contribution. So,
yeah, he's our guy, he's our Caesar. Which, by the way, right. I don't know if I've ever pointed this out. All these people who say like, "Oh, Trump is our Caesar, he's our Caesar," like, that Caesar put Gauls in the Senate. It was like one of the first things he did, and he was tremendously dependent on his corps of engineers to make his victories crossing the Rhine and against Vercingetorix. He was not. And he was fighting the stodgy homelanders, right? The stodgy home people back in Rome. And he did everything he could to disenfranchise the established powers of Rome, which that's the one thing we all agree on, is we should disenfranchise established powers, as we watch.
Right.
We hired a Caesar so he could sack Rome, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, so that's one thing that, there's people wouldn't be grappling with what is the foundation of a civilization that enables it to hang together, that enables people to people to have a self-understanding in which they participate, raise families, build businesses, create dynasties, and live fruitful, spiritually fulfilling lives. People tend not to contemplate that kind of foundation unless that specifically is missing.
Yes, that's actually kind of the part. Oh, sorry to interrupt, but that's kind of the weird funhouse mirror effect of history. Is that you'll see in like Victorian England, there's tons of preaching about modesty and these values, because there was a major problem with those values, not because they were. I mean, they were a lot. There was a group of them that were very virtuous, but that's also the days of like, let me just say, like, rowdy harbor behavior from many Englanders. Like there was a massive, like, you're at the mercy of an angry god kind of thing, because of they wouldn't be preaching about stuff if everything was hunky dory. So exactly, I just want to point out that there's that funhouse mirror of history of the stuff that people write about tends to not necessarily be fully representative of how things were universally in that time it was written.
Right. Yeah. It's the extreme edge cases of the human condition that draw attention. And then you have the effect of like, okay, we're writing about the edge cases. We're writing about the most fascinating, the most lurid, even if it's true. But the imagination grabs onto it because of saliency bias. And, like removed by time, that becomes the entire world. There's a really great book called The Not So Wild West that's actually about, the American Western frontier and its reputation for violence and how deadly a place it was. But it turns out, like, just on actual historical basis, it was a relatively very safe place to live, safer than most of the rest of America, excepting things like Indian raids. But these gangs, these shootouts, these duels, these outlaws, all of this is publicized enormously at the time because it's a massive deviation from the norm and excites the imagination. And then now we're looking back and we see a Wild West that was mostly quite tame.
Yeah, you know what? That's another thing that we see right now is that we're seeing, let's say, lots of plane crashes, right? And I saw a stat that actually the first month of Biden's term had a similar number of plane crashes. Same thing happened. I didn't confirm about like the poultry factories being on fire. Someone pointed out, like, someone just asked the question of what's the relative rate of year over year of during COVID, there's all these poultry places catching fire. And right now, anybody can go onto Twitter and see that a very fringe minority opinion that doesn't actually move voters or have a base whatsoever is pervasive and everywhere. And now that we know about USAID is even sometimes astroturfed, right? Which we all kind of suspected. Yeah. But you'll see a lot of opinions written about prolifically that are not actually common opinions. And that's where I want to lead in with the discussion is that I worked in marketing briefly. I work in sales for quite a while. And I find that the revealed preference means everything, and what people actually say can kind of indicate where things are going. But it doesn't really say what people actually want, right? You've got England with probably the most liberal government possible at this time, leftist government even. And I think 72% of Englanders say they want to get rid of the migrants, so they want to stop. They definitely want to stop it. So you have the majority of the voters saying one thing and then voting another. I don't know if that's poll magic, but I think the revealed preference of the election and who was elected and how wildly popular they are, that's kind of hard to deny. And that's what's created this identity crisis that I'm having of like, what is a conservative? What did we elect, I guess? And what are they conserving, I suppose?
Yeah. So I think there's different groups, civnats, ethnats, 90s Dems. You could name many more. I mean, the sort of evangelical American right used to be a major power and now kind of no longer is. Like, essentially the 90s destroyed them.
I think so, yeah.
So there's sort of, I've identified, four things that, like, what are we conserving? But it's also so the four levels, the four things of what are we conserving. There's the old thing, conservatism is liberalism driving the speed limit. It is essentially, we're going, the direction of travel is set. We're just dickering about how quickly we get there. So essentially you allow progressives and social cause vanguards to do all the driving. You just henpeck them. The next is a specific set of traditions, peoples, etc. So this would be institutions, eating turkey on Thanksgiving.
Yep.
How you relate to holidays, special occasions, spirit, community, etc. It's all specific institutions. It's one way here, you go another place, it's different over there. Conservatism can look different country by country. And, when you talk about the right wing or the left wing internationally, it often doesn't make sense, especially the more geographically removed from you this place is, because what they are conserving or innovating can be pretty radically different. the next thing of, what is conservatism? Ideology. A specific, beyond institutions and traditions. This is a specific characterization of the world in an idealist sense of what makes up truth, what makes up meaning,
And even how
what
to
is
even how to
right
like
and
look.
wrong.
Yeah, and even just how to look at stuff. Like the ideology is the lens upon which the people look at things. And I've noticed that most of Europe sees stuff as ethnic because their ethnicity has been tied to their land for so long. Whereas Americans actually don't think that way at all. And I had to pay attention to the Europeans for 4 years now to kind of figure out how they think, and that's just how they think.
Right, yeah, and they've basically always been ethno-states, and most of their major wars and conflicts are about when, they're essentially their ethnic lines aren't being respected, especially by imperial powers, and that they're sort of being slammed together.
Yeah, it's weird because you mentioned the Turkey thing before too, and a lot of these conservative values that are now out there are like post FDR, right? FDR is the one who made Thanksgiving. And I'm like wondering how many of these are Thanksgiving style conservative points, because you'd think that like Europe would understand the Russia-Ukraine situation from an ethnic standpoint, that you have ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine, and it's just another European war. By that description you gave, it sounds like what's happening in Ukraine right now is pretty much just pretty bog standard European, but it's not bog standard post-war.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because we had this post-war liberal consensus that says you can't acquire territory through warfare, and and it's sort of what this leads to is everybody has to embrace just war theory and really carefully concoct
Oh yeah,
casus belli for everything. It's often ignored that Russia did this in holding like referendums and plebiscites to like, yeah, we want to join the Russian Federation. And it's like everybody knows that's kind of bullshit, but literally everybody who goes to war does this nowadays because of the post 1948 consensus.
Yeah, and it's just about finding the right excuse. So fighting terrorists was fighting terrorists was the decade previous. Well, 2 decades on, getting old. It was the 2001 9/11 truth. Was we got to fight terrorists, so we're going to destabilize this region and rebuild it, right? And now it's fighting for democracy, which is just another buzzword. I'm glad that one of my favorite things about social media existing is just allows people to talk to each other like we are now. Make our own interpretation rather than have a state-driven or corporate ideology. I think right now we're having this massive clash of ideologies that are incongruent to how people are in terms of their human nature, right? Like the Russians in Ukraine, the Ruskies in Ukraine, they want to go join Russia. They're not allowed to, and they're punished by the Ukrainian government, I hear. That's according to Putin. I don't know anything about the region, but let's just say that that's true. Human nature says they want to go join the country that they belong to. Same thing is happening. I mean, obviously, I'm now comparing Ukraine with Oregon, but there's the Greater Idaho Initiative of people want to leave the state of Oregon and go join Idaho. It's a change on the map, but it's a massive deal. And people just don't like America was fluid like this too. Like America used to have really weird, like if you know American history, it's a weird place. People tell me that freedom of religion is a thing we've always had in America. I was like, no, it wasn't. Not at all. If you
look at the Mormons, look at their history. American history, like one of the most interesting and telling veins you can take through American history is look at the creation of weird Christian sects. Yes. And how wildly they diverge from each other. And, it starts to really go off the rails in the Midwest and the westward expansion. But even you look back at like the shaking Quakers and stuff, or how radical Connecticut was versus Massachusetts. The colony was always less powerful, but they were sort of Massachusetts's perpetual hype man trying to drive them to like crazier and crazier,
really?
Like wars or theocratic measures. Yeah, it's a weird relationship. I mean, I think you could write a whole history of America called like A Study in Apostasy, just about Protestant sects in America.
Yeah, how absolutely outrageous will our religion become? Like how every time we get done crossing the line and making our own community of Christians, now we're going to cross the line yet again inside of that community and bifurcate it
Right.
until it's very
Well, and one of the most salient ones for sort of our modern times is progressivism as a movement in the early 20th century sprang out of late 19th century pietism. So
really
essentially, what we're dealing with is one of the largest social movements over the last 100 years has essentially been one of these, weird apostate Christian sects that just pushed through, secularized over time, and
yes.
came to dominate social notions of theory of history and the moral trajectory of the universe.
Well, it's funny because that line that they crossed in that sect, that final line out of Christianity to secularize it, was probably the divinity of Christ himself. And then it's like now you're fully secular, but all of your weirdnesses you're going to bring it, like your sort of puritanical hangups, your almost public executions that they do in terms of rather than kill the person, they just kill the character of that person,
Right.
and there's no forgiveness on earth, right? And because they've gotten rid of divinity, there's no forgiveness anywhere. They're hyper unforgiving in terms of their penalties, and then they lost the one vector for forgiveness. And I've noticed that the North, the sort of Yankee North, has been responsible for a tremendous number of beneficial but always extremely destructive moral crusades. Even
Yeah.
abolition was horrendously destructive to the South. Prohibition created probably the almost destroyed our country. Actually, like the gangsters had such a grip over entire cities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know what a weird twist is abolition was this big massive damage dealing campaign, but what's kind of funny is the post-war carpetbaggers, who were also the same like scions of Yankeedom, did a
yeah.
massive amount of good in the South. And like some, not all Southerners will agree with this. I was raised in Virginia, so I am kind of a Southerner myself. um
I
but
fancy
essentially,
myself quite. I'm something of a Southerner myself.
yeah, I was born in California, but like my heart is always with Virginia. That's
I've
that's the
also.
culture. That's the culture I really came from.
That's funny because I was born in California, but at the age of 3, we moved to Maryland, and yeah, that's too funny. I'm
Oh
also
man.
kind of a Southerner. I'm below the Mason Dixon. Hey, they threw the Maryland governor in jail. Lincoln did to stop him
Yeah.
from defecting to the South.
But yeah, the carpetbaggers were essentially super influential, particularly in picking up and rehabilitating American blacks who were, freed slaves, children of freed slaves, perhaps even freed before emancipation, and essentially giving them like the educational and cultural base which the South was unable to provide to keep them
Yes,
on their, like to keep them on their feet and ensure that there was not a total societal collapse post-war.
there's a good book. I don't like the writer because he fits in lots of liberal tangents. Almost said the SPERG word, but my wife hates that, so I just try not to say that. But he has those episodes in there. But it's a pretty good book. It's called the was it American Nations. It's a pretty famous book. It makes its rounds. Some people hate it. There's a lot of argument. I would love to see rebuttals to it. I wish there was a website that just had the book on it, and then you could see users submitted essays on the book. That'd be great.
Oh,
Just
that would be fantastic.
like, can we?
Yeah, just crowdsource public commentary. I mean,
Great.
the American nations thing is like it's less well studied and significantly more ideological, but it's almost like a modern
Yeah.
update of Albion's Seed,
Oh,
which is about the four. Have you read this one before?
I'm not. I've not heard about
Really,
Albion's Seed.
really good book. It's about the four major British settlement groups of the Americas, and sort of how essentially they brought their culture from their particularist region of England, time locked it, removed it from all its context, and like now let's watch this develop. So
Exactly. That's the
you
American
have
story.
Yeah, you have the Puritans coming from mostly like Anglia and East Anglia and what Essex, something like that.
Mm.
And then you have the Southern gentry coming almost entirely from Southern England. You have um, the Quakers coming from the Midlands, and then you have the Scotch and Irish like borderlanders filling in the Appalachian backcountry, and then sort of becoming the Southern underclass.
Oh
And
yes.
they all bring things like naming conventions, religious beliefs, attitudes toward money, toward leisure, toward industry, food, all this stuff with them, and it informs it informs these different cultures. New York is also a bit of an edge case because it absorbs so much Dutch stuff.
Yes, it did.
Um, but this I find is a great companion book with Thomas Sowell's Black Rednecks and White Liberals. He
Yes.
fundamentally disagrees with the Albion Seed thesis, but the two have like kind of a pretty interesting
Mm.
interplay.
I've read Thomas Sowell's book on white liberals and black rednecks, and I thought it was actually kind of funny because in that book you talk about Southern Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my family. We're the super high. Yeah, so Singapore is my ancestral homeland, more or less. Well, I mean, what do you call an ancestral homeland? We were from North China originally. Then the Mongols invaded. We were driven south, and we were known as the Hakka, the guests. That just means guest. We're really good at making ourselves useful to whatever host region we're in. So we tend to integrate well, and we in the mid 1800s we'd set up a bunch of trading companies, and the Dutch were pretty impressed. We actually created my great grandfather created a bank to rival the Dutch bank because he was tired of them having a monopoly on banks. So then they bought him out and put him in charge of the Dutch East Indies, which was rad. He actually has a Wikipedia page on him. But
Nice.
yeah, it's kind of funny if I ever wanted to like get really spicy, you can have a good comparison between us and the Jews and how we're really good at making
it's economic middlemen minorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and this is one of the things that gets there's a couple of questions you have to ask in the conservative space was it always this way? Are there exceptions to this? Are there large periods where there are exceptions to this? How new is this?
Yes.
And does anybody else have this? When you're like the Groypers in particular and like noticers, like, okay, yeah, you notice the Jews doing a lot of things, but it's mostly because you have this sort of Eurocentric worldview.
Yeah.
Look at other parts of the world and see what you notice then.
Well, it's funny because the Europeans, like, I'm just going to talk about my family for a little bit. I'll do a video sometime on my family history, but they unwittingly put the Hakka tribe in charge of that entire strait. They didn't realize that the Dutch had put us in charge in Jakarta.
That they were picking the same guys over and over again.
Yeah, but because we get along really well with the West. We study. We're honest. We're friendly. We're not very ethnocentric, so it made us work really well. This part of the conservatism, I think, maybe I'll just cut right to the chase, where I think conservatism right now is under a big issue. That European conservatism of a time, a people, a place, a culture, a way of doing things, a temperament, all that stuff being part of your homeland, is kind of central to them staying together. And America is not really that way, not anymore. There's been a lot of things from the Albion Seed to now that have made America less than that or greater than that, depending on your perspective. But what the Eurocentrics don't realize is they like almost bred and chose people who are very non-ethnocentric from other parts of the world to run their empire. And now those people came to the America in early 1900 and on, a lot of Chinese and a lot of Indians. And they're pretty much running things as if it's the empire. Because that's what they know how to do, and that's what made them all the money in the first place. Like back in their home countries of India or China or Indonesia or Singapore or Hong Kong or whatever. So it's a weird thing is that things are changing in a conservative way. Like these two types of conservatism are actually clashing, and both of them will say that they're conservatives, And then you have the American homeborn conservatives dealing with it. And the immigration debate actually just ripped the whole thing wide open, because that is the big fissure that separates Eurocentric conservatism from what I'd call American conservatism, or even just, I'm going to call it imperial conservatism, because all of the colonies kind of fall this way. Strangely enough, South Africa is probably the one that didn't, to disastrous results, where they are very strict about their heritage and their peoples, to the point of being exclusive. So are the colonies versus the home country? Is that the way to frame this? I don't know.
I mean, I think that's one dimension on the way to frame it. And God, we got like super far on a tangent. I'm glad you were able to bring it back. There is a strong element of Euro-conservatism versus American conservatism, and I think what the sort of the constitutive thing of conservatism, what actually makes all these like disparate groups conservative, is a disposition rather than a particular foundation, set of principles, traditions, etc.
Yes.
Because those are wildly variable, and they vary time and place. God, there's so much in what you just said.
Feel free to pick it apart, man.
Yeah, the fourth element of what is conservatism that I didn't get to earlier is an evolutionary adaptive disposition.
Yes,
essentially that conservatism as an attitude is like either a proto form or a branch of evolutionary scientific thinking. That you protect what works. You do not get obsessed with rationales, justifications, etc. You look at survivorship and whether it persists effectively, and then you adapt as it needs to meet changing conditions. You preserve the organism by changing it.
Perfect. Yeah, and by the way, I will try to butt in. You just keep talking and I'll shut up. So that's kind of how this works. It's like, oh, okay, because I will just like go what? Yeah, and then like if you stop, then I'll take it. But if not, you keep going. Don't worry, I'm not offended by that. That's great. Actually, that's the way I prefer. The obsession with rationale has made the weakest conservatives. I think everybody wants to dump them off the boat because they keep arguing. Like, I'm going to be a dick right now and be like, Dave Green, you didn't have to argue with the guy in the corn outfit. You don't have to argue with every leftist you see. You don't have to rationalize. And that's the power. That's why America powered through this, actually, I think. And it was Trump, because they just said, nah, fuck you. Like, nah, fuck you. It's like how this country was founded. It's like, I'm just going to do it. And we don't. And I get kind of frustrated because you see this, especially with Englanders, they want to have a debate. And that only works if your opponent is good faith. And it also only works if you're in a secure place, right? Ideas actually are quite dangerous. And sometimes to entertain an idea creates a rift inside of your own people that is more destructive than the good that you get out of entertaining the idea. So this right now, like this, it's weird. I hate to say this because like conservatism today is so stained with liberalism, but it's like if you try to entertain every idea at all times, it's actually like psyoping yourself into focusing on what makes you different versus what makes you more the same. And I see that all the time of like, this debate is beneath us. We shouldn't have this debate. And you finally just say like, and you do like what Matt Walsh did, which is he just ridiculed it. He just made a movie called What is a Woman? And then Am I Racist? And he just showed it for being stupid. He didn't make I don't know if he made any points against it. He just videotaped the people being crazy. And was like, okay.
The last portion of it, he kind of goes for it, and that's where it falls down, but mostly just showing it. Like, here's the thing. You are right that there is a cost to having a debate, and if you have this sort of liberal attitude that you should have every debate all the time, you're going to fall into traps. Also, in addition to that, like there are some debates that you simply don't have to justify because no amount of rationalization can overcome how much this doesn't work. I do not care how good times are. That like I will simply not entertain a debate on the merits and virtues of child sexual abuse. Fuck off with that.
Yeah, I had a
We're
joke.
simply
Yeah,
never having a conversation about the morality of that, because it just obviously on the face of it does not work, and I am not willing to waste societal energy getting to whatever fringe benefit like there may be there.
yeah. You guys can wait. You guys can wait. But I used to have a joke that would denigrate libertarians. I said, a communist, a libertarian, and someone who doesn't want to talk about the age of sexual consent walk into a bar. You know? It's like we don't have. That's the problem with the libertarians. Actually, that's the reason why they fall apart. Is they debate everything endlessly,
Yeah.
rather than just put stuff on the chalkboard and be like, feel like kind of meh about it. Like everything is kind of a meh decision. Like Trump is a weird anomaly in that he wasn't a meh president. People are enthusiastic one way or the other about him. I don't think there's a single person who has like a moderate opinion on the man, and that's unusual. Usually,
Right.
people.
And there's also
yeah.
nobody who has an unvarnished endorsement of him either.
He says too much
Everybody
stuff,
has
yeah.
something they're upset with him about.
I know. Yeah, there's the bump stock people. They'll never stop talking about bump stocks. Nobody knew what a bump stock was before he banned it. It's like, I don't want him to ban him either. Like, I'm not like, because then you got to do this whole thing of like the Seinfeld of talking about how the guy is gay. It's like, listen, however you want to live your own life is however you want to live your life. That's okay. But I just don't care about bump stocks. It's not.
Right.
And it's like you're going to lose a 99% candidate over the 1% problem. I was like, okay, but anyway, I digress. Yeah, the conservatism of the West right now, and America is the center of this, and I think it scares the hell out of everybody in Europe to see it, because America put everyone on the path to post-war liberalism. Well, maybe Europe helped too. I don't know who tangoed in this, because I see that my notion of the presidents during the post-war period, or like the FDR especially, where they were very much Eurocentric. I almost think there's a bit of a sycophantic relationship between New Englanders and
Oh yeah, specifically
Europe.
FDR.
Yeah, and he, I don't know who got who sick, but we're all sick with it.
Yeah.
You know.
So that was an important element of what you said earlier, bringing us back on track. There's a term that the philosopher Eric Vogelin uses all the time. I tend not to crack it out because it's a little esoteric, but ecumenic empire.
That is esoteric.
It
check
is.
that out.
America is a world-embracing empire. Whether we pretend to be,
I see.
nationalistic, homeland first or not, and part of it is this is just how liberalism works. In the past, I've described liberalism as an API for Christianity. Essentially, it allows for English Christian civilization to interface with other civilizations without it having to be conquest or very limited trade. But it's sort of this modality we can shift into that allows us to syncretize all values and then work shit out. The trade-off of this API, one, if you remove Christianity, the other applications are not talking to your society correctly, because the back end program is no longer there. And two, this API necessarily turns your civilization into an ecumenic empire, just in how you have to change your thinking about the world and beliefs and peoples. You will necessarily become world embracing. And I think you're right to point out that the only one of the colonies that didn't go this imperial direction in their psychology and mentality was South Africa. And that's because it was mostly Dutch beforehand and deeply particularistic, to the point of, fuck you, we're taking all our stuff and marching thousands of miles and getting massacred along the way rather than live with your English shit.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's actually kind of funny to have a comparison between New York and South Africa. That'd be an interesting, that'd be an interesting thought experiment of like, how are the relations and how is this API broken, right? Because it's like the Dutch were like the programmers before. They had their own API, which didn't necessarily link up with people, right?
I would assert that English liberalism was the first invention of cultural APIs, aside from maybe like the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire. And even then, it's like you got to be subservient.
Yeah, for my family and my people, we were the like universal subjugates, I guess. We were super happy to serve whoever showed up. I think we serve 5 empires now: China, Japan, British, the Dutch, and America. Now we're employee of the month in every single one of those branches. It's how we stay alive. But it's weird because we see the way that Western culture is built, and it seems really unstable. And they have this like fourth turning stuff. I think we talked about that a little bit. You left a good comment. I would love to talk more about that. It seems like is conservatism even stable? Because you're kind of suggesting with this English liberalism API, being the API for Christianity, is it too accessible? Is that a strength or a weakness? Because I'm torn, because right now, first off, if Kamala Harris got elected, I wouldn't be torn. I'd be like, liberalism has killed us all.
Right.
But now I got a monkey wrench in my thinking, and now I'm having to think fast, and it's not my specialty. So,
I mean, I think it varies by context. In the American context, I think we're much more sentimentally attached to it, because it has sort of enabled us to have this, like, yeah, it's an API for Christianity, but we also had a country that was founded on 4 different stripes of Christianity. And the history of our country is, Christianity getting weirder and weirder, and in some cases almost incompatible, and having a little fight about it, and then essentially reconciling through this sort of mechanism of ideological liberalism. So, like, it's clearly not all bad, but you have to recognize, like, there's no strict advantages, there's no strict good and bad in base reality. There's just trade-offs. This is one of the most important things that undergirds these 4 possible contingencies for what is conservatism, is that there's an underlying split beneath that, and this is just epistemologically super important. There are 2 layers: base reality. This is hard material things and what's mathematically provable on top of that. For instance, division of labor is always superior to isolated efforts. It's just mathematically provable. This part of economics is baked into base reality. Then on top of that, you have the world. Base reality is atoms and particles and things and mechanistic interactions. World is the domain that meaning exists in. It is interpretation of these things. It's assignation of agency, and so on and so forth. The levels of ideology, traditions, and liberalism driving the speed limit all operate in world. Evolutionary disposition is strictly base reality. Does it function in base reality? Okay, let's persist in this. Like, let's propagate upward the base reality winners into world, and this propagate upward of base reality winners into world creates a coherent emergent picture. That's one of the most important things about evolution, is that all order is emergent.
That's actually an interesting point. I'm just going to jump in here because I become disenfranchised with my philosophers from England, or certain ones. I think I stopped watching all of his stuff, so I can't give a thorough look on like Academic Agent or whatever. But I used to watch some of his stuff. I probably still would. But he said something like change is enacted from the top down. I was like, that's obviously not correct. No. Like, our politicians are surfing on rabid waves of piranhas. Like, if Trump steps out of line, his base will eat him alive. Like, he tried to get him to cheer on the jab once, and they booed him. I was like, this crowd will turn on you 100%. And the Romans knew that. They're constantly trying to appease their citizenry. They're not in control of the culture either. Like, there has to be a time and a place. Like, elections happen in the year they happen, right? It's almost the voters are just a conduit for the time to vote. Like, the times are voting. The culture at the time is voting. People get tired of one thing, people get tired of another thing, and you can't force stuff on people. And
well,
everything
it's interesting because the culture at the time is voting, but it's not voting on what it wants versus what it doesn't want, or what some portion of it wants versus what some portion doesn't want. It's voting on what's on offer at the time.
yes, that's true.
There's a second temporal layer that's also finite itself, which means that you often don't get what you want, in aggregate.
That's true. That's why I think that maybe the planets have aligned. Maybe this because people weren't even as nearly as enthusiastic in 2016, right?
Yeah.
So that Trump was, and that's why it's wrong with being being ahead of your time. That's what that means. And I think people tried to play games with who's going to be the elites to be on offer, like who's going to pick who's on the roster. And obviously the Democrats do that quite a bit. Yeah.
2016 Republican primary.
Oh yeah, that was true. That was funny.
It's auditioning for which of us pre-selected options are going to be on the elite, and like in 2016 I watched almost none of those debates with the sound on. Like it was just TV in airports or bars or whatever, and I could tell immediately looking at it who was winning and why they were winning. I didn't even like Trump at the time. I actually found him pretty reprehensible, but I could tell he was cleaning these guys' fucking clocks because of they were going through this preening audition process and he wasn't.
The Europeanization of America from FDR onward, especially with mass communication, like radio was the FDR's time, and then eventually with television, all stuff. All that stuff is very corporate, centralized communication, and that's where you get this pre-selection. But now we have a forum where I think is the most American thing, where any asshole can just get up to the podium and start throwing punches and hear cheers or boos, and that's letting the people choose what they want. It's not an infinite choice, but it means that you can upset the system. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Trump was the first memed president. They say they memed him into office, which is some truth to it. So things are rattling up, and I feel like the post-war America, or the FDR onward America, has been trying to control the just the surf full of piranhas that have been waiting underneath by choosing the surfers and trying to choose the times. And I think now the consequences are out of the bag. So America is now proceeding onward, I think, from where it was in 1890. But it's 100 years plus later. And who are the players who are working on that layer, that base layer that you were talking about? Like, who's actually being really productive? And it's not going to be the people that you want to be. Like, you don't get to choose who's the most valuable assets. And I see right now that the central conflict between who we elected and who's actually winning versus the so-called base, I don't actually know how many people feel about this, is that you do end up having immigration being a major part of what do the people who are productive, or who are the people who are in power, want in their country, because they're going to this sort of empire that is America, and that is also and I don't think it's a coincidence that it's the English post-imperial nations that are doing this as well, India and to a lesser extent China. I think India makes up 72% of H-1Bs. They also they really help each other out, which I think the West wishes they had more of.
Oh yeah, Indians have very strong in-group preference. Like somebody who used to work in the Silicon Valley Bay Area, you would see it all the time. Like essentially an Indian gets moved into a hiring manager position, and very rapidly the company starts to fill up with Indians.
Yeah.
I mean, and in many cases these are talented people, but it's very interesting that this is a sociological transformation that happens all at once, based on one managerial decision.
I think they go. Our tactics are less of that. We don't have the in-group preference that the Indians do. We just try to be really competent. But us South Chinese, I think they're pushing a little too much. No one should notice you. That's the best thing, is the majority. No one should notice that you're working there, but people are noticing the Indians, and now it's causing a fuss. But I've worked with, I worked not at a tech company, but I worked at Stanley Black & Decker, and the vice president rose up from the R&D division. His name was Banu. And then very quickly you started seeing that every other new job hire was Indian. I didn't really think much of it at the time, but we did notice it, and we didn't like it. There was something visceral we didn't like about it. And because we're Americans, we we'll just spout off from there. We don't need to actually figure out any facts, figures, or rationality to just bitch about things we don't like, which is part of why America is doing so well. They just
right. Yeah. We just fire from the hip, and like we don't necessarily have to go through the rationalization level. Sometimes you miss when firing from the hip, but I'm kind of like you, where it takes me a very long time for me to like cement my position in place where I feel I can talk about it.
Yeah.
And one of the effects of this is like, okay, very careful, very low miss rate, very low damage inflicted, but boy, do you miss a lot of shots you could have taken from the hip.
100%. I've become more of a hip shooter. I respect hip shooters. I absolutely do. And I kind of go by whoever is most adamant and consistently so is whoever I'll listen to, because they'll at least babysit this thing that they'll babysit this dragon they let out of the cave. At the very least, like they'll die with this thing. Like, all right, that's good. Okay. And that's what you see on social media, is that you'll see like, this is the USAID guy, Mike Benz. He's been dogging this thing for years, based on suspicion alone. Right. I think America's doing really well because of that.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I'm just going to say that this conflict now between, maybe this is a conflict between the base and the world, or at least the perceptions thereof. Do I think Americans can be as good as foreigners? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually I think the main reason why foreigners work so hard is because they have a close proximity to poverty. Like when you drive your car past people who are in intense poverty, who of no wrongdoing of their own, right? This isn't like a drug addict. You drive by a drug addict on the street and you're like, oh, yeah, he's a drug addict. Of course he's there. That's not me. I'm going to continue working at my own casual rate. But when you see like people that look like they're good people in abject poverty, you're like, I really got to go to the library. I need to pass my CCNA certification right now. I have to, because that's how it was. Like my uncle is director of all of Honda in Indonesia, and my grandfather was the director of all of Toyota in Indonesia. And those guys never stopped working because they could be cut loose any moment. The sense of urgency is there. So do I think Americans could be as good as foreigners? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think IQ plays that big of a deal. I think it kind of moves things a little bit, but I think anybody who wants to do this job could probably do it. They'll just be harder.
Yeah. And thinking effectively quickly is a far greater skill than the sort of perfect ratiocination of the genius.
Oh, yeah.
But what you've described is sort of a trade-off of Americans having no understanding of class. There's a whole domain of sociological problems that Americans will never understand because they don't essentially understand class, or at least you don't understand class outside of New England.
Well, and they'll deny it too. They'll say that there isn't none, like, because you'll see all these self-made millionaires, and you'll be like, "Well, there's no class system." I'm one of those people.
This has been remarked on by visitors that America has no poor people. It only has temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Oh, that's I like that.
Is essentially we all have, like, in aggregate, a sort of psychological disposition of being in the same class, and it's the fucking winners. And that's also part of why Americans get resentful when they aren't winning.
Yes, actually, that's true. Like, it was funny because the response I saw to like the Vivek Gate thing was nobody was saying any concession whatsoever to Vivek, not even a little bit. They were just either really mad at him or were like, eh. I mean, I don't even think he got ratioed. So it's just people being very loud about it. But I read it. I showed it to my wife. My wife is 100% Australian Anglo. She was like, yeah, it looks reasonable. And I was like, nobody who I've asked to read this ever says anything it's unreasonable. But people are loud about it. People are angry about it. People are resentful about it. The fact is, like, to make an engineer, you have to start from like 8 years old. You got to start like really young to make an engineer. That's the kid. A good engineer is the one who is wanting to go to the museum. I once got lost in the museum, or my parents lost me in the museum, and I was down at the bottom floor of the Smithsonian Science Center, where there's like a kids area where you can play with electronics. And I was just there doing that for like 4 hours. Like, you got to know the level of crazy. And I'm not even autistic or anything. I just like hobbies.
It's one of those things in like mentality and how you are interested in the world, where I mean, I've heard it in other domains. If you're not a world-class mathematician or pianist by age 10, you never will be.
It's those are the extreme cases for sure. That's probably true of like absolute top world class. But the funny thing is that my culture wasn't about like encouraging me to be an engineer. It was discouraging me to be a classical guitarist, which is what I was going to do. But because my dad gave me such a tight coupling with money and prestige, I took a look at the job description when I was in high school. I was like, I'm never doing this. Screw this. I'm not going to make any money. But, anyway, you see Americans will go for degrees that don't mean anything or they'll think that they can get a degree in engineering and be an engineer. And that's tough, but I'm good.
Right. It's credentialism. I have to take a second to check in with the missus and then make myself a fresh drink. Give me a few minutes. I do want to come back to the split between the sort of war between world and base reality, because I think there's a lot in that.
All right, let's see. I'm going to decide if I'm going to vamp here or if I'm going to see if I can upload a video to put up. That'd be nice. Nick Ricada's piss break video. Shout out in the chat to that. Yeah, so I mean, I understand why people would be upset by Vivek, but I think you guys gotta get a thick skin, grow a spine. If you want to make fun of him, definitely make fun of him. I saw that happening. That's great. I think making fun of Vivek is the funniest thing ever because he's kind of a total dweeb, and he definitely is Screech. I think that was a revealed. That was a revealed thing in his rant. He's going on about, oh, we should be glorifying Screech, and I was like, no, you shouldn't. Screech sucks. Screw Screech. Just get the jocks like doing electronics. Get them ham radio licenses. Do not listen. It's easier to learn engineering. Take this from me, as an engineer, and as a guy who has some level of like social competency. The social competency was much harder to get than the engineering thing. Okay, shout out to all the guys in chat who are watching this now or later, who are trying to find a wife and that don't have all the traditional avenues to do it. Church, family. People, workplaces. Workplaces was a place to find a wife. Shout out to that because that's gone. Meeting people is hard. Social stuff is really hard. Screech is going to have a harder time in life than what are the other guys' names. I didn't watch Saved by the Bell. I just the theme song pissed me off. I didn't like it. And I wasn't a goth kid, but I was a drab kid. I guess you'd call me like the goth that doesn't have any friends. I didn't try to wear any makeup. I just have dark hair. And I had pale skin at the time. So I just thought I was a goth. Oh, man. Almost spoke out of turn and said, let me just put it this way. There were some events in the 90s that made it so that loners like me got a little bit of peace and quiet. I'll just put it that way, okay? I'm not happy about the circumstances that made that happen, okay? But it is a silver lining that I had a lot less. Oh, a background, nice. I had a lot less crap given to me after that. A certain set of circumstances and events that led to a lot of anti-bullying campaigns, which didn't work, by the way. It turns out bullies don't care about anti-bullying campaigns. It turns out you can't legislate good behavior. You can only punish it. And the problem with punishing bullies is that there was also the zero tolerance policy, which meant the victim got the same detention. So there I am, laying down linoleum with Mr. Hershkowitz in the basement with the guy who punched me in the face, which ironically was good bonding time. He was really good at the linoleum. Oh, it's too funny. It's too funny. The funny thing is, the Americans make really good engineers when they hobby it. Like, there's a saying that there's no. Oh gosh, I forgot the saying. Don't you hate that when you're about to say a saying and you forgot it? I'm just gonna give you the gist then. There's no end of work that a man could put into something if he ought not to be doing it, and that's what a hobby is. When Americans decide to be hobbyists at something, they become world class. Like, they'll just be doing something secretly in their basement, and then 10 years later, they're, putting together a stock car or something. They actually have a job in it. I once knew a guy who was a trucker who became a professional photographer. Just while he was trucking, he would just point his camera out this window. He learned everything about photography. The man, like, we give the Asians and Japanese credit for being very studious. This trucker knew everything about photography and the interaction between exposure time and such, and he became a photographer, which is not an easy business to do full time, and it was making more money than he was as a trucker. So Americans just have a different approach to greatness, I think, and that's not through school. As a matter of fact, it seems to be telling Americans you can't do it. So maybe Vivek's 4D chess move, pissing everyone off, is actually going to create a generation of great engineers. That'd be great. Just the doormats out of every. So. That'd be really. Spite is great. Maybe that's. He should just. Well, you can't. He can't pivot because it'll ruin the magic. But it'd be good if they revealed it somehow, like 10 years later. It's like, yeah. Fuck Vivek. I got my son enrolled into engineering school and he loves it. He's going to be a great engineer. And we put in the doormat out of the engineering college. It's just Vivek's face. Oh, that'd be. Maybe he knows us too well.
the master manipulator just drop the bomb and fade.
That'd be great. Just. I think that's I like to interpret things the most positive way possible. And I think that's going to be my new reality. That's my.
You can live in the base reality is always going to be the same, but you can live in any kind of world you want. Why not live in a fun one?
Oh yeah, I absolutely just make up a fantasy here, right? When I was a kid growing up, I thought I had my imaginary friend was Captain America, and he was awesome. It was great. Best imaginary friend, and everybody has an imaginary friend. It's called Donald Trump. And they put all sorts of characterizations on him that he's never said before. And it's like, we won, he's our guy. And he's like explicitly saying stuff. I heard from a liberal friend of mine, I couldn't find a source for this, but he had said that Trump had mentioned at one point that he was going to allow student visas to transition into work visas, which would be...
Oh, yeah, I saw that a while back. I'm like, that's wild, bro.
That's 11... There's only 65,000 H-1Bs usually handed out, and then some extra to Singapore because we got a treaty with them. So it's not a ton. It's actually, I forgot what the math was, but it was like less than 1% of the workforce in the tech center, like tech. And if Elon changes if there's some change to H-1B, so it's only 200K and up, which I think a salary minimum for H-1B makes sense. That just makes sense. I think it was like 11 times the number of foreign student visas, and the foreign students don't need financial aid. They don't usually get financial aid because they're foreign students. They're actually the cash cows of the university system. So I could almost see if the universities lost federal backing of student loans or like got put into a corner, they'd probably actually double, triple, quadruple down on foreign students, and you'd see more foreign visas coming in. So I don't think he's going to do it. Now he saw Vivek got shot. I mean, you don't usually see your buddy get shot that hard and then decide to just double down. That's more of a Democrat Party thing right now. So they're probably gonna. That's one thing I like about Trump is he just totally reverses course if he sees he's just Homer into the hedge, just walks away from a crime scene. It's like no, it's not gonna be me.
No, yeah. Like if it's not your issue, why die on somebody else's hill?
Yeah, and that's why I think that Trump is just a reflection of America, what it wants. It's probably why there's so much enthusiasm. And it's like, what does it tell us? Like, what is the revealed preference of electing Trump and cheering on Trump and loving Trump? Like, he's got pretty good approval ratings, definitely among his base. It's probably insane. It's probably post-Reagan or past Reagan. So what are we learning here from Trump about us?
that thing about Americans don't have a comprehension of class. We all belong to the same class and it's the winners. But this has the trade-off of making us resentful when we're not winners. We're there. This is as base a motivation as it sounds like. There's some weird stuff in like populism versus elitism, and America's philosophical foundations actually for a long time have been extremely elitist. Populism at sort of the better schools is reflexively discouraged because people think of the populism of Rome. The populism we're experiencing right now is almost of an inverse character to that, but most elitist philosophical thinkers don't seem to comprehend that. We're in the state of resentment right now. Trump got elected the first time because we actually had the imposition of a brand new class society of permanent civil servants, permanent elected officials who are basically not electable out.
Yes.
And the sort of moral superiors to over a no gods and masters kind of people. and
Yeah.
and it's like, fuck you, fuck everything you stand for, we're going to destroy you. And the guy we elected the first time didn't really know how to get it done. And then
Yep.
we
Yep.
got another upper class guy, and then we elected the first guy again, but this time he's pissed too.
And I think that his, like, what Trump went through, all the way up to his second run, and during it, it seemed to resonate a lot with Americans. It seemed like, yeah, I've had that before. I've had the IRS on my ass. I've had people slandering me and lying about. Like, any guy who's been through a divorce has probably known what it's like to get lied about constantly and have your reputation dragged through the mud. Any guy who's ever sort of lost his job to an inferior replacement, and then have people tell you that he's not inferior, right? Lie to your face like that about obvious problems. People are basically being gaslit, and there was a major acid reflux reaction to all of that. And I mean, is populism here? I think that the populist versus the elitist guys is that the elites get to choose, or we were discussing before, the elites get to choose who's the panel of choices, and the populace gets to choose from that panel. And I mean, maybe now the populists actually have an ability to affect the panel itself, in which case the elites lose a lot of power, and now they just become a choice rather than a leader of it. So we're going to see how things go. I don't. He's destroying.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
You're always, and this is there's the neo-reactionary sphere and the elite theories guy. Elite theory guys kind of drive me nuts a little bit because they occur to me as like sort of the maximally cynical people who can't really see which way is up anymore.
Everything's the regime. Yeah.
Everything is pure power and pure exercise of power. And it's like, bro, what makes you happy in life has very little to do with power.
Dude, people would elect Trump if everybody's salaries went down by 20%. They'd probably still elect him. They wouldn't care.
Yeah,
They don't.
yeah.
They don't care about the tariffs or economic ramifications. It is. I think you're right. This election was actually just the embodiment of resentment, and then seeing what Trump went through actually made people identify with him more and make him want to do more. So
there's always going to be an elite, and this is one of the things that Carl Benjamin has talked about a lot on the Lotus Eaters, particularly when talking about immigration, because it's, well, GDP go up. Okay, I don't care if we have to be poor. It's the right thing to do to stop this. And that's sort of the position I feel people are in. But there's another layer to it, because you can present it as this purely moral case, in which case his argument does have force, just ceding entirely the ground of economic reality to your opponent. The problem is our elite now, there's always going to be an elite. It's a question of whether you have an elite that is spiritual losers or not. And our elite are spiritual losers, like, I don't know how to say it other than like feminized longhouse thinkers,
right,
where they don't differentiate between objective benefit, good, superiority, ability, skill, etc. It's all sociological. It's all power showing favor, etc. And that's the entire way that they comprehend the world. Our elites hold a particular view of base reality that, when it comes to economics and sort of production of goods, flow of global trade, that's actually just wrong. They're actually just idiots, and their theories are popular because it's about power showing favor. But if we reject their theories, we will actually be materially better off, because they've essentially become corrupt and stupid over time. Because it becomes much more of a feminine selection process of, rather than selecting for virtue, selecting for orthodoxy, conformity, get alongness. The film world actually has its own version of this too. You see, like, in dog shit films, you watch their behind the scenes stuff, and everybody's like, oh, they were so great to get along with, we had an excellent time. Legendary films, like truly great films, I fucking hate these people, but we made a masterpiece.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's their religion. I think that's their replaced religion. I think the GDP stuff is just an excuse. Like nobody actually gives a shit. Like no one. The only people that give a shit about GDP are the people who are knowingly pumping the GDP numbers up right now. Like the average person doesn't care. Like another thing that Trump got elected on was the fact
GDP is also a fake number. Like it double counts government spending and all this shit. Like it's only believed it by people who were not smart enough to ask serious questions about what they got in their economics class.
Exactly. Yeah, and the thing is where the Americans, they don't care about rationalization. I think they care less about rationalizations than the Europeans do. The Europeans are good students. I actually have a concept that I throw around called a paradoxical mediocrity, which I shot on a video that I never uploaded because it's a funny story. I was sitting down and my belly looked huge. I was like, I'm not uploading this to YouTube. I'm just going to I'm never sitting down in front of the camera again. But paradoxical mediocrity is that sometimes having bad qualities to your civilization is a massive asset. I noticed that having a criminal underground is actually how Chinatown was able to stay a cohesive ethnic group. The fact that you just drop Chinese people into America and they actually stay cohesive so much so that some of their elderly don't even have to learn English, right? And they're able to cohere. Having a criminal underworld actually helped that out quite a bit. So and that criminal underworld comes in really handy when you go to a war. Like there are a lot of veterans who are in the mafia, and even now, a lot of people go into the Marines do so because they're getting military training because they're gonna go serve their gang when they get back home. I met one of those guys when I was in MEPS. I was enlisting the Marine Corps. I got medically rejected, freaking asthma. Anyways,
it's often been remarked about the English and the Scottish is that they miss a lot of major ideological blunders and sort of totalizing worldviews. Because as the observers at the time note, mostly in the 19th and 20th century, they're too stupid to get on board with this stuff.
Yeah.
So they actually have like persistent functioning societies. Stupid is the wrong word, but essentially because they don't indulge themselves in intellectualizations and are mostly just concerned with what is sensible, they miss a lot of bullshit.
Yes,
they miss a lot of high-level speculation, but like they don't get turbo fucked by bad exposures.
Correct. Yeah, they're not playing the game of they're not playing the Russian roulette, right? Sometimes you win the bag and sometimes you get banged. That's the thing. It's that a lot of Americans have that same spirit of like, screw you, my grocery bills are high. That was probably that's it. That's one of the main forces that got Trump elected, I think, is that people saw the economic ramifications and no amount of trying to convince people otherwise would ever speak to them. I think that I might even do another talk sometime about the brilliance of USAID being at the first target because it's actually normalized firing government employees. If it was just once people started seeing the kind of crazy bullshit USAID was spending money on, now everyone's just out for blood. Well, there's people just saying like we should hang them. It's like, good Lord.
I've been on that train for a long time. It's something I usually keep to myself, but like, what would justice in this situation look like? It'll look like a lot more hangings than we're probably going to get.
I think it would be funny is if, I mean, this is not going to happen, but it would be very funny if it did, is that we actually did sentence somebody to death and it was going to be a public execution. And everyone's like, Trump, you're an evil dictator, evil dictator. and then the thing is like, it drops and it's just another platform just below it. So it's like they just drop a couple inches and it scares the shit out of them. And it's like, and you're going to prison. We're not actually going to execute you. Technically, you've now been hanged. So.
That's all the benefits with none of the downsides. I love it.
And your pardon. Go have a fun walk. Like have a fun drive home. Just have to. You wake up that morning thinking you're going to get hung in front of 1 million people watching on live streams, commenting on you, and now you're like, you're over at Zaxby's getting a chicken sandwich. Just, the whiplash would be the best.
Oh my god!
Oh my god, that'd be too funny. We're almost a funny enough country to do that, but I think we might miss that one. But
I think we're just a little too resentful in the moment right now.
Everyone's pissed. That's why I love it.
Well, yeah, everyone's pissed or like frantically being like, you remember a few years ago that like we should just have a COVID amnesty article kind of thing.
I remember that.
There's violently pissed or COVID amnesty too.
Exactly. And the problem is they went really extreme with their stuff. They didn't do the nudge. They went for the big ask because maybe it works for Trump and Trump gets away, but they didn't get away with it. They could have made something a little bit more reasonable that would read the room a little bit better and then have that option right now, because now they only have those two options. It's either people with torches, like random Americans with torches, or complete amnesty. And people are probably going to lean towards torches, but I think destroying the agencies and seeing people freak out on TikTok is giving everyone catharsis enough to
Well, also destroying the constant money influx, because like this is one of the wild things. You see all these listings of homes in Northern Virginia going up for
Oh yeah.
sale, and you see their goddamn price tags. I have a working class, like my best friend growing up, working class guy living in Northern Virginia, and he's been like saving, 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 saving. You know, this is a very fastidious minded, like Protestant work ethic to the core
Oh yeah.
guy. And
Yeah.
he's just like, I don't know if me and my wife and kids can do it. I'm seeing what's happening after all these agencies and grants are getting slashed, and I'm like, oh buddy, you might be able to get more than you think.
That'd be amazing.
There is a certain kind of, it's not the kind of karmic justice that everybody would wish for, but there is a kind of justice in, yeah, the money gets cut.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to downgrade your lifestyle significantly. Also, you've spent the last 20 years as a federal bureaucrat. You know, what are your life skills?
Yep.
So, you know, you're never going to earn that good again. Never mind however much was on the take. Like, you're essentially punishing people with returning them to their level of capability.
Yeah, I know, right? Which they're going to freak out about, and it's going to be very funny. And I think there's something to, you know, watching the spoiled trust fund kid now have to work the line next to you. I think Americans get a lot of satisfaction because it was funny. I was talking to an Indian guy about Bollywood movies or something like that, and this is early Bollywood. And he said, "Oh yeah, then this movie, there's a rich guy, and he takes over the town, and he's a real tyrant and everything. And the hero of the film kidnaps him and kills him." I was like, "Good God, jeez, slow down!" Like Americans don't do that. We just like to we like the Happy Gilmore ending, where we just humiliate the bad guy. We don't have to kill him, for God. So I think probably everyone just is going to be satisfied with the humiliation of having to work a regular job. Which is very funny to say. Our revenge is you have to live my life.
Yeah. The kind of dark twist, though, is, and this is one of the conflicts between base reality and world, is world actually slowly changes shape all the time. Yes. You mentioned one of the advantages being like social media, getting to connect, you know, essentially being able to seize the stage with a live stream or a podcast or something like that, and create a voice. One of the other ways that the world is changing shape is humiliation and banishment is not what it once was. And this is one of the big things that like Mike Benz is on about, particularly for internet censorship and this whole sort of USAID, CIA, State Department world.
Yeah.
You just pivot to Europe. Because they don't have their own Trump purging the institutions. And, you know, while we've cut USAID money to all these European institutions, they still have their own money and their own vested interest in protecting their regimes. You're an American internet researcher. You still have a job market. You're some kind of, you know, you're some kind of like, if you had influence and you have a big Rolodex of people's phone numbers, it doesn't matter how incompetent you are. Internationally, there is a job market for you. So the humiliation, ironically, is actually mostly for the lower level people.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So, you know, that's a bit less karmic justice than is desired. Like Henry Kissinger would never be out of work, no matter what happened with the administration. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It is,
but there's a really important thing in here, because that's one way in which the world has changed shape. Social media, another way in which the world has changed shape. It is important to recognize that as material conditions move in base reality, this has implications that affect the meaning level in the world, and the world changes shape over time. What a lot of people think of as like conservative or like a Christian lifestyle, sort of a stable, conserved world tacks back to medieval times. Well, guess what? Technologically and physically, conditions barely changed for over 1,000 years.
Yes, correct.
This also means that, like, you know, social roles, expectations, traditions did not change a ton. However, there was still gradual movement. There's a great book called A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman, which is about sort of the late Middle Ages and
Okay.
the transition around the Hundred Years' War and the Black Plague. In this book, she mentions that every 20 years, the French knightly class had a 50% churn rate. 50% of
Really?
knights dunned out of the class to lower classes and were replaced by people on their way up.
Oh wow.
So what looks like total social stability is still moving. And
Right.
even if very gradually, technological conditions are changing over time. The Black Death was a major innovation, mostly because of how it freed up land resources and how it
Yeah.
interacted with the labor market. The nobility keeps churning. And then eventually, like defensive technologies, the invention of cannons, all this shit, like it creates eventually that the world of the late Middle Ages is quite different from the early Middle Ages, even though year over year they look the same.
I want to button that up because it's kind of an interesting point. That yes, the world layer is changing a lot, and I actually think that conservatism is super doomed if unless they are very smart with what they choose to take with them, and very like almost unsentimental about what they leave behind because the world is changing so rapidly. Like the concept of a childhood is actually pretty weird in the way that it's done in the West, where it's like you're just completely idle for the first 2 decades of your life and beyond if you go to depending on your college experience. And
this is one thing that was great about your video on the nuclear family. And one of the things I cited earlier is when you're looking at what specific traditions and institutions you're conserving, you have to ask yourself questions like, how old is this actually? And how anti-fragile is this actually? It's like, oh, the nuclear family is like less than 60 years old. Oh, childhood is less than 300 years old.
Mm-hmm. And what's for the,
it's not
for the nobility too. Like,
and it's not to say that there are no virtues to it or no innovations cultivated there that are worth conserving because they'll do us well in the future. It's that you have to keep in mind this is relatively new and not everything in it makes sense. Also, particularly for new things, there's a tendency to push the underlying principle to its most absolute. Children go from like a time of innocence and relative protection to absolute idleness and sort of just torpor, versus like you had sort of a lead up in the 19th and first half of the 20th century to manhood that went with you have responsibilities toward animals. Maybe it's chickens, maybe it's the dog. You have responsibilities toward the farm. You have labor. You have responsibilities toward the whole family and the community. You were expected to carry a gun and protect against wolves or intruders. And then like as we go later on, your car, tractor, whatever, and then you are given control of an aspect of the business. You are a man now. Go marry, go start a household. It was this great nation bringing someone from this sort of naive childhood up through the full flowering of manhood, and now it's just you're a child until you're 22 out of college. Good luck.
A lot of the stuff that and to have a woman be ready to have children, right? This whole birth rate, and the funny thing is the debate about birth rate from the conservatives is usually economic. It's like it's not an economic problem. People are having kids with far less in the past. The problem is that there's not a lot of spiritual attachment to death. Like most people don't experience death. They don't really understand that. They don't like biblically know, of biblically know in the know in the biblical sense of like actually put your hands on it. What death is like. It's like there's a goldfish. You flush down the toilet. You move on with your life. Here's your grandma. She carks it. You put her in the box. You put her out there. You put some flowers. You have some tears, and then you move on with your life. There's a lot of moving on with your life. But if you have a farm, like I'm on this little homestead farm, and there's been like absolute tragedy where, this one sheep, she got away from us while we were giving vaccinations, and because she didn't get her vaccinations, most likely is the reason why she has now a double miscarriage, right? Her twins are, and then we got to take the miscarried lambs, put them in a bucket, walk them away, and the mom is like looking for them around the barn for like 3 days. It's tragic, and you realize how like precious and short life is. I was like, and that would be a 10-year-old girl would have that experience of carrying the miscarried lambs and burying them. She'd probably ask her brother to dig the hole, and she'd make a little cross, and they'd do the whole thing, and there's no parents involved. Oh, my camera just died.
Ruh-roh.
Oh, there I am. 1 second, I'll fix it. It's now pointing out the other way. The whole life experience is just not happening the way it's supposed to, right? So
Yeah.
people's perception of how life is totally wrong. I'm actually just going to turn my camera off for a second while I fix it. It's not an economic problem. It's a life perspective problem that people are just not growing up and people are not focused on what matters. Because if you want to experience something that matters, you actually have to experience losing it. And that's why a lot of heroic stories and from someone who's highborn gets cast low and has to return, wants to return back to their original position or greater, has to go through that tragic loss. And most people in the West just don't have tragic losses that they really have to feel. We do everything we can to stifle the impact of the loss. I guess
we lead really soft lives, and it's not okay. So there's something about like the economics versus the sort of psychological experience. That I do think there are economic factors impacting these things, but it's a bit nuanced and it's a whole ass other conversation. It's adding a distinction where I don't think is kind of necessary for the purposes of this conversation. I will say, we can asterisk this and just move on as though I agree with you, because I basically do. Yeah, people's psychological experiences of lives are kind of all wrong for creating functional adults in certain aspects of a functional society.
Right. I think it's just that, and I don't think that the economic conditions are a non-issue. It's just that I think the fire that makes people go is deprived. I think I made this.
That's a good way to put it. The fire is missing.
And I put it to this way to my wife the other day. Is that yes? Okay, so tie this to the fourth turning a little bit, and that we can discuss that another time. But let's just say that there is a time where strong men make good times, right? It's like, why'd you make the time so damn good? Like, you robbed your children of a struggle, and struggle builds character. So now they don't have any character. Like, stop doing that. You should just be like, okay, lads, making okie dokie times. Like, it doesn't have to be that great.
Coming of age, I think this is actually, like, if you look back through other civilizations and kind of returning to the start of this, it wasn't always this way. And can you find times that, times or circumstances that provide counterexamples? Yeah, manhood rituals exist in societies where, relative to times in their past, they are much better off than they once were. Societies that have manhood rituals still relatively primitive. And they sort of get softened into the have a dog, have farm responsibilities, etc. over time. And then those get softened into nothing, mostly by urbanism. But manhood rituals are essentially enforcing an ordeal on people going through a good time. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. And we've kind of... It is. I acknowledge this is an oversimplified way of saying things. Our culture is sufficiently feminized to the point where ordeals are no longer appreciated or treated as valid.
That's true. That's true. Like, don't make them suffer through it. Just give them the answer. And I'm very resistant to building any sort of society, like guardrails that are based on externalities, right? Like, why was everybody thin back in the day? Well, it's because there just wasn't that much food. That's not really a great way to build a culture, because as soon as you get some food, people aren't fit anymore, right? Maybe there's a culture of using less than what you actually need, sort of thing. Having a culture where you are self-sufficient in terms of what comes to you. Like, I'm gonna try to put it another way. I'm trying to think of a good example. If the only reason that you're not a drunk is because you can't afford alcohol, that's not a good thing. And the problem is that the West kind of gets really drunk on whatever it can afford. And I see this over and over again, where it just indulges fully, which usually religion is what moderates a lot of these behaviors. Any religion across the world, just universal across cultures, usually religions involve deprivation, except in the rare instance where there's Greek ones where the religion enforced indulgence. Those
Well,
usually, those usually
the
don't last.
religion enforced indulgence, but it enforced indulgence one as a specific ordeal. Dionysian rituals were connected with serious ordeals, including confronting mortality,
Mm.
partially through like psychedelic experiences and shit like that. And
Oh, I see.
two, Dionysian culture elite phenomena. This was not for everybody.
Oh, it's
This
true.
was for somebody who had to do something serious. So you have to experience like sort of the maximum thresholds of vice and the maximum, thresholds of mortality salience.
Oh, yeah, it's true. And one of the things I found a problem with, especially with the West, is that America's world circumstances are constantly churning, which means that if you try to conserve too much, if you're, you will inevitably die out. Even with stuff like anti-porn, right? Because if you're so draconian on being anti-porn that it's like, oh, it's the devil, you got it in my house, get it out of here forever, and demonize people who get involved in it, you're actually just going to make people not want to be involved in your church at all. Whereas if you have a church that is like, no, it's bad for you, we're going to control it, it's a struggle, people struggle with different things, everyone has their own struggle, and we're going to help you with it. Like where you're going to I think a confessional type of thing is probably better, because I see the reason why the 90s Christians, the really evangelical 90s Christians failed is because they alienated themselves from everybody who had any sort of vice. And I see them failing. I mean, they'll fail now too. I think it's just pure like Donald Trump's charm or whatever you want to call it, that they don't get really mad about all his many vices, which he has a lot of vices. If you actually
first presidential period, they got plenty mad about it. I mean, that is to say, the ones that didn't feel that they had enough to gain where they wouldn't swallow their ideological beliefs and play along.
Exactly.
The ones that felt like they were on the outs certainly complained about it plenty.
Well, yeah, it's the thing about being on the outs is you got nothing to lose, and now we get to hear what you really think. So it's like, what do we conserve right now? Like, what is a good conserve? What are the good things to conserve? What things are we going to expect to fall apart? Because right now in the United States, like I've heard people say that, my family's been here for 400 years. Things are changing. The factories closed down and we've been abandoned. And I was like, well, that's the American experience at this point. I mean, it's almost an American tradition to uproot people and throw them into the wind. Even like the grapes of wrath and stuff. It's like this happens all the time. These are trials. In fact, the entire American experience is like a trail that you keep having to go on, this journey that's going to shake you up. And trying to make a really quaint European style village is really hard to maintain that. Like for my family, that's why we did all the studying. Because things changed really fast. As I said, like 4 empires died within a few lifetimes there. Massive upheaval, massive like colonization resulted in the winners and losers of that region switching overnight. And we always had the sword of Damocles. So it's like, yeah, we're doing really, really well. Things are really, really quaint. Also, I'm studying and reading 4 or 5 hours a day with no external economic pressures forcing me to do so. That's what it takes to actually hold on to something. And we still don't even hold on to it. Stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think things that are worth conserving are, one, alternative avenues to, being a success in life, essentially life meaning or life ambition, which is extensive beyond, sort of the capital structure and earnings and physical contributions, I would say. I think, and this is difficult for me to articulate because I think you and I both kind of belong to a similar kind of person. You hear people talk about like somewhere people versus anywhere people.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I kind of get the sense that we're both anywhere people trying very hard to make somewhere our home. Because like I grew up, I was born in California, and the first half of my childhood was all over the country, all over the Midwest, Chicago, like, and then I sort of regard Virginia as a spiritual homeland because I spent over a decade there, and it was the first place I lived where I was really enculturated. Versus looking at my friends and it's like, well, it's been 3 years, why aren't we somewhere else now, kind of thing.
Right.
And this has, I felt, informed my attitude on work, life, career, communities, etc. Even, I do competitive wargaming as a hobby, and even when I like settle into a local community, most of my closest friends are friends I meet on the national circuit. I see them a
Oh,
dozen or
yeah,
more
yeah.
times going to tournaments around the country.
That was rad. I didn't know that
And
about you. That's cool.
we sort of meet in anywhere places, and for me psychologically that's sort of the domain that some of my closest friendships reside in. That's different from many of my friends in Virginia grew up their whole lives there and have never left, like vacations and travel and stuff, but
Right.
like
Yeah.
they have the assumption that they're going to live and die here.
Mm.
And that they're like, what is the life end game here? Being a millionaire would be nice, but it's, about cultivating this rich community.
Mm.
Having even like very micro institutions that are persistent beyond one's life, or being a contributor or founder for these kinds of things. So I'd say like one of the things worth conserving, the shape of the world changed very little in the Middle Ages, but it's still changed. It is changing very quickly in the modern world. More
Yeah.
and more things are increasingly extreme and asymmetrical, and there's no reason to suspect that this natural trajectory will ever stop. It is a
Yep.
function of capital accumulation in base reality. Just the world is going to look more and more like this every year that passes. Things that are worth conserving. And again, I'm an anywhere person, so I struggle to articulate this, but like knowing neighbors, finding sources of spiritual fulfillment, inviting
Mm.
people into a form of participation that is not just materially objective, and has a sort of emotional force to persist intergenerationally.
Mm. Yeah. The building a place in an anywhere world. This is kind of an anywhere world, and especially America. Congratulations to America. You are the king of the hill. That means everyone's coming for you all the time, and you will always have pressure because let's say that there's a nation called Atlantis, right? And they just have 300 IQ super geniuses. Like Trump and Elon and all the people in power are going to be falling over themselves to employ those people. I don't care where they're from or what they think or what they believe. Almost certainly. You'd be foolish not to. You'd be absolutely foolish not to. And I know that derogatorily, some people refer to them as like, was it high value human capital? Like it's a really good way of dehumanizing it, but I see why they're doing it because they want to emphasize that they're there for economic reasons and they are economic mercenaries. But this is it's kind of a mercenary country, and I agree with you that you kind of have to be responsible for building your own community if you want a community. I find nothing more detestable when I hear some allegedly conservative guys like, "There's no third places." I was like, "Just make one, man. You can just build a bit. You can just build a third place. Have it be your. It could just be your living room. Like you have some video games with friends, or you go to each other's houses. Like someone else's house. A pub was a public house, right? It was just the house that had heat. It was a house in the neighborhood. It was kind of why it's called a public house because that's where the firewood was, and you could go and get warm, and people started serving drinks there naturally, and that's where the pub started. It was just a shared space.
Everywhere that I've like since I left college and was like out on my own, everywhere that like my entire social group has come from has been hobbies, specifically wargaming. Like I find a club that has War Machine, I go there, I show up, I meet people, and I pour everything I can into making this space work because it needs to persist.
Yes, and I think that you're absolutely right. There's a lot of resentment too with people losing their stuff. So I see right now the death of institutions. A lot of major institutions that we trusted. The Greatest Generation was an interesting generation in that they really trusted the government. And they brought that along with them, and institutions were very strong. But now we're seeing institutions fall apart, and people aren't really sure how to deal with that, right? Because now they have to build it themselves.
But yeah, that's like sort of a lot of the thesis of bowling alone is this drop in civic participation and public life participation. Part of it's mobility. And as an attendant variable for mobility, which I don't think the authors draw enough attention to, is uh, mixed up cultures, that you are starting to get the phenomenon of anywhere people or transients who don't share your values, institutions, etc., and disrupt existing community life. It's kind of described as its own thing, but really it is deep down a function of mobility. And mobility is a function of capital development, that we just have the material wherewithal to move people. And I'm not just talking internationally. Most of the focus of Bowling Alone is mobility within the United States and the disruption of existing communities.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I lost it. Keep going.
No, you're good. That's all right. By the way, I'm good to hit the 2-hour mark. I don't know if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I'm good to hit 2 hours. I think that's probably a comfortable endpoint.
There we go. Yeah, exactly. Me too. And I've got a glass of whiskey there, just calling my name. I love. By the way,
vodka and lemonade.
Nice. By the way, I got into. There should be like a last 15 minutes of any stream of guys talking as we start talking about hobbies, because my new hobby has been making my own mixers and sodas. I have
yeah, I saw your greenhouse live stream. You were talking about like the alcohol sublimation to make your own cola kind of thing.
It worked really well. And now I have some very disgusting tasting alcohol though as a byproduct of it. It's like grog. It's so bad. It's because it extracted a lot of the bitter elements of everything. So if I put some juniper berries, it'll be a nice gin maybe. But anyways, yeah.
If you ever travel, just treat it like Malort or Samayaki. Like it's alcohols that are basically brewed to troll other people who don't know about them.
It's just joke alcohol. I'll do that. I'll do joke alcohols. By the way, that's one of my hobbies that I want to get into is distilling and start a community around that. I'm also building a small chapel on my property, hopefully someday. And it'd be kind of funny if it was like church on Sunday, but if you like home church essentially, because that's how we roll. We're in a Muslim. My family's was from a Muslim majority country, so you tend to keep things pretty family oriented, pretty local, pretty. Don't celebrate Christmas in Malaysia. Don't celebrate Christmas in Jakarta. I mean, it's okay now. Jakarta's better now, but they'll get you. They'll cut you out. I actually got threatened by Muslims when I was in Indonesia in 2008. They were asking if we were Christians. Now, the question, the answer they're expecting is for me to say no. That's not the answer they got. And they was like, put up or shut up, guys. You want to kill me or not? And I passed the test. I was actually just.
As it turns out, there's 2 correct answers.
Yes, it's no and apologize, or yes and be very funny to them. You could get away with a lot if you got a sense of humor. But anyways, that's a tangent. The conservatives, I think, are going to have to start picking stuff up on their own, because Trump is good at destroying things. And as bad as the old order was, it was still order. And who's going to pick it up? Because now America is kind of the king of the hill. Who's going in? There's got to be a rush of people who are now trying to subvert America. There has to be. Who's going to try to subvert us? Yeah. Have you seen anything like that?
Everybody's trying to subvert everybody. Like it's a natural thing. And the USAID, intelligence Pentagon world thing is sort of a symptom of a greater, like, okay, liberalism forces you to be this kind of ecumenic empire. Well, as it turns out, being an ecumenic empire that, especially after, conquest is made illegal post 1948, being an ecumenical empire on like pure principles and convincing people and or kicking their ass via military virtue is really, really hard. What's significantly easier is undercutting the foundations of their civilization and making their society shit and unstable, and therefore prone to manipulation. And you just need to pass a few bucks and you get whatever you want. And one of the problems is like the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies are explicitly prohibited from doing this kind of thing at home.
Exactly.
But USAID isn't.
That's right.
And if you're trying to do all these things all over the world and you are faced with opposition at home, the best thing you can do is destabilize your own country, make it suck.
Yes. Absolutely.
make people incoherent, unable to manifest, a concerted, organized response. Essentially, we're living in a time where like everything is destabilized. Our
Mm.
and there's this thing about like, oh, institutions, what a world where our institutions, where we don't trust our institutions anymore. It's like, well, what's more damaging? Lack of trust in institutions, or institutions objectively cannot be trusted and abuse that trust. The
Yes.
second
Yeah.
one is way worse.
Is it? Oh, yes.
So there's this is another like base reality versus world thing. Human beings and the way economy operates, we are improving our circumstances continuously. We are creating surplus, like
Yes.
be it as like a sort of primitive hominid, having more food than we need, which enables time for napping tools without missing out on hunting, etc. You propagate this forward millennia and millennia and millennia, and you get capital accumulation. This is the natural trajectory of agentic creatures capable of manipulating their world with sufficient intelligence operating on the world. The natural trajectory of reality for agentic creatures is that the world slowly gets materially better through capital accumulation. If you see a widespread, systemic, and sustained reversal of this trajectory, it means something's going wrong.
Oh,
Now,
I
there's
see.
business
I
cycles,
see.
but business cycles are short term, and you liquidate the misallocated parts of the capital structure. If this sustains for decades rather than years, it is not the result of natural forces, because her trajectory is to continuously improve.
That's true.
If you
Yeah.
see this, it is specifically the result of bad actors. And it sounds like a very gin brain thing to say, but like systematic long run decline in the standard of living does not happen naturally.
No,
This
it doesn't.
happens
Absolutely
through
not.
malice and incompetence. Like heads need to roll to stop that, because there
Yeah,
are
and
specific people that are doing it to you, even if they believe they are doing good. And as USAID reveals, they actually know that they're doing harm, and they're doing it on purpose.
Wow, that's crazy. I'd love to see what you like. Was there any specific evidence of USAID like correspondence in there that they knew they were doing harm to the country and doing it? I mean, other than having an IQ above like 2, you should know that this stuff is destabilizing and doing harm. I mean, it's kind of obvious on its face.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most damning one is like funding the Soros propagators, because USAID actually, or prosecutors, because USAID actually funds them at a rate of 10-1 versus George Soros.
Correct. Yeah, notice that, right?
yeah, but also like the whole intelligence world and the destabilization world does not operate in the open. The money is not just buying you the organization doing what it is doing. The money buys you a back channel. It creates a dependency between you and this organization that you are funding that you can leverage for other groups like the CIA or others who are not legally allowed to operate in this territory, or for whom it would be scandalous to be seen operating in this territory, talk to you and tell you what to do under conditions of dependency. Like there's some things where like, oh, you don't have a smoking gun. Yeah, but the purpose of this system is not to leave a smoking gun. The purpose of this system is to do something that's plausibly deniable. And like this is where the like, okay, you're going to try and have the perfect slow ratiocination. You're going to fall for this system every time because you can't like prove it. Versus if you get in the habit of reasoning correctly quickly, you will cut off this bullshit. And like this is sophisticated government stuff. You see this all the time in bullying behavior, in longhouse and behavior policing and thought policing. And if you try and be slow and careful about this, you're going to let maladaptive social manipulators ruin your environment. You actually have to crush this very fast because you see what is happening. Passive aggression is the exact same modality, and you have to you have to stop it as quickly and aggressively socially as you do at the governmental level. And like that's one of the things we can also conserve is do not tolerate maladaptive passive aggressive behavior.
Yeah, suffer not the snake to live in the garden. Even though it just whispers and it's not really doing any harm, it's just saying things like, ideas. ideas have to be aggressively attacked, and you'll actually see this with like especially dads who are from another country. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give the Sopranos example of in this house. you know what I'm talking about. In this house, Columbus is a hero. That's kind of how it is, though. Like you have to pretty much.
Yeah.
And I think for the conservatives, the old way of doing things, where it's like you use the shame, the church shame and guilt stuff, it just doesn't work super well because first off, those tools get grabbed by conservative
by sociopaths. Yeah.
Well, conservative ethos a lot of times, and then it blows up and it looks scandalous, right? It's like the church leaders. Like the church leader keeps doing the scandalous stuff and denigrating your religion, whereas I think conservatives learned how to have fun. That's the best thing in the world. In the last 8 years, they've learned how to have fun, even when they're getting beaten down by the system. And I hope they keep that up. I hope they keep the humor because the humor is it's reinforcing of their norms. It's reinforcing of it. The memes are fantastic. There's the great meme about the born again Christian lady who's lived a sordid life and then all of a sudden just decides to turn over a new leaf. Whoever came up with that phrase, I just want to punch him because that's not how it works. You can't just atone by apologizing and then moving on. And you don't get to speak at the convention, but apparently sometimes you do. You don't get to see the table. But humor can really denigrate bad behavior and point out hypocrisy. And go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say there's a lot of alpha in being bad and then reforming very quickly.
Oh yeah, it happens. It's almost better to be a massive scammer and like I was thinking about that too. Of like in your mind, if you want to be like the great YouTuber, just be an extremely bad actor for about 5 years to a massive following, so you have a big number next to your subscriber list, and then just reform. And then you'll be a hero on the right. That's just all it takes. Just you could be Mr. Beast scamming people out. You could make a meme coins all year, like for years, and have tons of money.
It's I think it's that the right has not only been in opposition but been in exile for so long.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh my God, a defector, you have viewership, please.
Oh my God, yes. Like, and why do we? And I was like wondering, like after the Trump assassination attempt, of like, why does everybody want to still talk to Destiny? He wants you dead. Like, why do you keep letting it? Like, why? So I was like, why is everyone still talking to them? That's why I made that Rules for Radicals video. It's like, stop talking to bad actors. It doesn't do us any good. We're not learning anything new. Why? And I asked myself, why do you guys keep doing it? Oh, you want the views. So you're willing to let someone just pop up and just shout to your viewers' faces that they want them dead and have the dragon, like, it's almost humiliating to have to listen to it over and over again. I was like, you're just humiliating your own viewers so you can get lots of viewers. I was like, this seems kind of messed up. That's my opinion.
I absolutely agree with that.
Like we're going to invite Satan to the church to tell us how bad he is so we can debate Satan in the church. It's like, it's not how it goes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, again, like you don't have to be tolerant of people who actually actively want to destroy you. And part of that is the short circuiting of the liberalism brain, because you need to be able to interface with people who hold radically different views. And like, again, returning to traditions, people, etc., what conservative is actually going to be incompatible in different parts of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Like what's conservative in the United States and what we are attempting to conserve, and we may share the same disposition with them, is incompatible with conservatives in Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. And you're naturally going to have a fractured base. That's why you end up with a sort of lowest common denominator. And that's why I don't do a whole lot of the moral policing. I think to me is, okay, like if the person's not in my church, I really don't care how awful they are. I mean, obviously if they say like, well, I'm a very holy person, I'll just repost a tweet they'd made a while ago. I'm like, no, you were kind of a bad person actually. And you thought, you thought Christianity sucked until Trump got elected. It's like, please don't. That's about the extent of it. But it's like, it's going to be a separation of spheres of like, this is the political sphere where we try to amass a decent sized tent. And here's the actual community that I hold on to. And this is how hard I hold on to it. And there's got to be almost not not just an in-group preference, but a group preference, that this is your group that you preference. So you're going to make political, like presidents have to make political alliances with all those four seeds of Albion since the beginning of the presidency. So
yeah, if your political coalition is large enough to win national elections, it will necessarily include some people you hate to death.
yeah, and then you can just sort of agree to, and that's why America, I think, is powerful enough, because there is a live and let live style thing in terms of what state you're from. So thank God I no longer have to care about abortion ever. I don't ever have to talk about it because I live in Tennessee and it's not my problem. Yeah. And I was talking to another Christian fella about it, and he said, "Oh, it's such a tragedy what they're doing in those other states." And I says, "It's not our job to go and stop people from sacrificing their child to Moloch. Like we can't police the pagans. It's not really our call." And it's like,
man, I spent the last 14 years living in California, and I wish I had that experience, because that's a group of people who never have to talk about that question. Absolutely 100% solved. Never have to talk about it, and talk about it constantly.
I know. Oh my gosh. I think people have to zero in on what's important to them and their group. So for my family, the Asians as well, a lot of the successful Asians came out of the ashes of empires that had fallen. So our model of what a nation looks like, and this is horrifying, by the way, to all Europeans, our model for what a nation is supposed to look like is the Dutch East India Trading Company, which is why we slot in really well as mercenaries, because that's what we were taught to do. And that's how we didn't have an abstraction of a nation until the Dutch East India Trading Company came in. So people are talking about, oh, I have these traditions of nation and identity. And I'm like, our tradition is that we're accountants. That's all we care about. We balance the books, which is why me and my family are like rooting for Doge really hard.
But this is an interesting thing. I heard the ethnic European conservative discussion gets really interesting for this kind of thing. And particularly, I think it was the discussion that Callum and Konstantin Kisin had recently about what happened in the post-Soviet breakup and why all of the Soviet states went back to being ethno-states. Essentially, when you deal with we're dealing with a disordered society in America right now. That's why we're trying to go back to principles of what makes a country, and why we're having this discussion between ethnats, civnats, 90s Dems, and everyone else.
Right.
Is because we're attempting to rediscover principles in the face of reality that things are not working right now. Like society is disordered. When you cross the terminal threshold of society no longer works to the point where the ruling institutions and the coordinating functions break down entirely, you revert to what is most immediately grabbable. For Czechs and Slovaks and Lithuanians and Poles and all these people, well, hey, guess what? We've been living around our genetic lineage forever, and we have some understandings and shared culture that predate this grand civilizational order. So let's just revert to that because it's the closest thing at hand. I think total order breakdown in the United States probably would not look like that, although there's a good chance it could.
The United States is weird because their ethnic groups are not that cohesive, and it's just not in the mindset of Americans. Like, we get pretty surprised by that, and the sort of ethnic part of you kind of takes a back seat to other things, such as your religion, or even just your region where you live, your geography, like which football team. People are more adamant about their football team than they are about their ethnic, and sometimes even more adamant about that than their religion, and that's just based on the geography where they live. It's weird because America's going to be grabbing at tokens of what binds people together until there's a critical mass. I think of America as almost being like a petri dish where you have tons of pathogens all fighting each other for domination of the nutrients there. And as you were saying before, it's like it's going to be emergent about what wins.
Well, that's why you get emergence of phenomena like whites. Which is nonsense outside of America.
Yes.
And then you also get the petri dish is growing and developing, and I would contend actually in the particularly in the 90s and early 2000s, and just the trajectory we were on at the time until the freaky race communists started, becoming much more socially prominent, that American whites and American blacks, as nonsensical as both these two terms are for racial categories or even lineage categories, were actually very, very, very close to becoming a single ethnic group.
I think so.
I.e., having a single tribe with full self-consideration and like admittance of one another, on the basis of recognition of kind. I think we were like right fucking there.
I think America, especially in the 90s. Well, so my contention is that the 90s Democrats won the election. I think they're the cultural zeitgeist at the moment, just by revealed preference. But that seems to be what everybody wants to return to, except for the people who are on the, I would say, the fringes, like the Groypers and stuff. They want an ethno state, I guess.
Well, I think there's also like folks like James Lindsay, who both of us were, pretty interested in for a while, but he's gone down this like his own particular weird ideological rabbit hole.
It's what happens when you read too many books, man. It makes you crazy, I think.
He's never explicitly said this, but sort of what's implied in his classical liberalism, I think, as wrong as he is about what classical liberalism is constitutive of, is there's still a strong enough undercurrent of Americans who believed in the previous paradigm before it was strongly culturally subverted, and they just want to stop fucking around. They want to get back to the life that they like. You can over-intellectualize that, but that's essentially what the 90s Dems are.
Exactly.
And in a lot of other conservative circles, it kind of gets slammed, but it's like, you don't need an ideological top-down position, bro.
No,
people agree with you if you just let them live their lives how they want and make fucking good times again.
Dude, if you had a big speech, let's say you have a philosopher there, an amazing philosopher and orator, and he's got this flowing speech about what makes a nation, and he's in a debate with the other guy. Another guy gets to speak, and all he does is just holds up these different TV shows that people liked. Hey, remember this? This is a great show. We should go back to this. Remember this? This is a great show. We should go back to this. Maybe not Cosby, but we'll try this. Look at this. Family Matters. This is a great show. We should go back to that. Remember those times? People are going to be like, yeah, that guy wins. Like, I don't need to hear your rationale at all. The revealed preference to me, I think, is that there is an identity there. I don't think it was fake. I don't think it was, because wokeness was AstroTurf. Now that we have the receipts from the USAID.
Absolutely agree, yeah.
It was absolutely fake.
We had in the universities, like, we knew it was fake back in the 90s, but that didn't stop it, because it's honestly too complex and too esoteric for people to care about when they're living in a society that they like.
Yes. And I think Americans are probably going to distance themselves from a lot of higher principles that were the post FDR, the FDR and beyond stuff. Americans are not very educated. They're not very philosophical, which I used to think was bad, but by the principle I call paradoxical mediocrity, that's actually really good for them, because it means they don't get swept into different things. We got 50 states. If Ohio wants to go become a communist state, we'll just wish them luck and see how that works out for them. Different experiments to go do. I think it's going to be interesting to see what emerges, because this is the first time without a lot of foreign interference. What is America actually? Are we going to pick up like the Spanish-American War just never happened, and where would we go if we just didn't get into entanglements? I mean, that's a long time to shoot back to and then pick back up on. So it's going to be interesting. I know we're about coming up to time. You have any closing thoughts?
Oh gosh. I have a whole big like note stock that I've been working off of here, because like over the last week or so I've just been jotting down things as they hit me. I think we hit the main ones.
Yeah. We'll have more. We'll have other talks too. Like, it's not going to be
yeah. If you're there's some interesting threads to pick up from this. Man, a book I would just recommend to everybody is The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson.
Okay.
It does not directly correlate with anything that we've said here, but I think a lot of what the book goes on about is sort of the undercurrent and begirds this whole discussion. It's a science fiction book. It's about ostensibly a world where nanotechnology is ubiquitous, like absolutely ubiquitous. Diamond is cheaper than glass. It's called the Diamond Age. All you have to do is arrange carbon atoms, cheapest shit there is, build everything out of diamond. What the book is actually about is in the changing shape of material abundance and material conditions, people start reorganizing selectively along, interests and a sort of spiritual or social kinship, not necessarily racial, and in some cases, many times ideological. But that these new files or self-organizations essentially replace nation states. And the book is mostly about the impact of people socially reorganizing and socially self-understanding into groups.
Wow, that
Um,
would be interesting
Very
because
much
then
worth a read.
I'd be kind of. I look forward to having like the American Guild of Painters or something, where it's just the social cohesion around a hobby makes it turn it into an institution. I'm looking forward to seeing what arises. If Americans get their country back, I think it'd be fun to have subjects for next time. We'll stay on for like another minute or so and discuss. But this has been a great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to end this stream now, and if you stick around for just a couple minutes, we
Yeah,
good?
for sure.
Okay.